All right. Hello again, friends. We are back. I'm Jen Brazelli.
I'm Kyle Godby. These are our field notes from the swamp. And today we have Wilneida Negrón joining us. And Wilneida, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I am Wilneida. I'm a technologist and an AI governance leader that's been working on technology with different stakeholders for the past 10 years. Everything from companies to policymakers and to communities and workers that are actually helping to shape how they're deployed. So it's great to be in this conversation with you guys.
Love it. The thing that jumped out most, like I love our conversations. And so I dispel this early. Wilneida and I go back to high school. So I always loved our conversations.
Yeah.
What I saw from you a few years ago that was really eye-opening was how you were sort of in your own realm, seemed like from my point of view, exploring complex adaptive systems and social systems in a way that very few people were. But I had sort of found enclaves of people that were doing this, and there was a body of knowledge there that was supporting that. But you were coming at it from not a perpendicular angle, but you were sort of generating this uh, in a place I wasn't familiar with, or at least or maybe on your own. And so the sort of true wisdom of the crowds, where we're all sort of sniffing things without talking, was sort of apparent. And
Yeah.
this is what Field Notes is kind of about. Is we're in the swamp, and now we're coming back and sharing what we've been observing. I'd love to hear what you have been finding out there. What's brought you to this?
Yeah, no, that's such a good observation. And I remember some of our Facebook political conversations as well, but
We
that's
might
like,
get
oh,
into that.
yeah, that was an interesting socio-economic analysis of politics. Again, like probably 10, 15 years ago. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think, for me, I entered the tech industry really from like a humanistic angle and then taught myself how to code. So I went from humanistic knowledge and insights to the technicalities and then back to sort of the social technical of it. It was like, what is it once you build this technical thing that you may have translated these values that you were trying to do, and when they go out into the world, like how do they actually react in its true social environment? And that talking with computer scientists at the time to understand like how do they think about ethics or values, or how do they, when someone comes to them, a lot of the tools that I was working at the time were to modernize the justice systems. So it was like increasing access to justice. So I'm like, when someone comes to you to build this thing with this like big public mission, like how do you in your computer CS science understand this, and how does it play out in the code? And at the time, like yeah, most people were not thinking about that. They were just like, well, this is like, I'm just building this thing. It's just a technical thing. And so I wanted to, yeah, learning how to understand the programming, the technical is sort of why I taught myself, and also where I started to learn how to talk different multidisciplinary languages, because then I went from sort of studying social sciences to understanding the world of, computer science, and then the broader world of like politics and social and economic impact of these things. And are we, even like if you're just thinking like, is this tool doing what it's supposed to do? Like that is also very multi-stakeholder, and you have to understand people's, a policymaker will look at it from one angle, a community member will as well, the worker that might be using it. So it's like it became like very quickly, I realized like it was like a complexity that lived in sort of multidisciplinary, schemes of thinking of the world, but it was also much more like interwoven and intermarried. And so I think now, fast forward now 15 years, I think we see that more deeply. For me to have that conversation with people, to talk about AI, to think about on all the levels. Like it's the tool. It's also like the existential question of like, who is this going to turn us into? It's also the computer science question of like, how are frontier labs that are on the front lines of building these, like how are they thinking about it? It's also on the other companies that are building the fun, consumer things. So it's like, yeah, it's always, the work has always been about understanding different bodies of truths about one thing, and then being able to, so that they can translate, because like for me they've always been interwoven together. And then how out of that do you pull out a common reality or conversation, like with AI right now, like what is it doing to the way we communicate with each other from what social media has already done? That's a collective conversation that we're not having as a country, maybe like in our families, but it's also a question about guardrails, So it's like, how do you translate that into like guardrails that need to be clear and like need to sit in regulations with the broader existential, and not having, so there's plenty of complexity to swim around in right now. And I'm just curious how you guys are, take all the complexity frameworks that you have and think about both collective, like creating the conditions for collective sense making, and but also pulling out the tangible, because you both have worked in the private sector, that you can bring people together and you can like bathe in complexity, but like you need certain outcomes. And so I'm curious, like what has like worked for you guys to do that?
Jen, you want to take that one? Start.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is itself not one thing. It never is, right? It's so context dependent, but that's largely what Kyle and I have even come together in these chats to talk about, because that is the question that a lot of people want to hear about or to have answers to. But like you said, getting very both comfortable with, but also developing a felicity or skill with bringing the multiple bodies of truth, like the phrase, that's kind of the key. So what that actually ends up looking like and what that ends up producing is obviously so unique to each scenario. And I think, at least for me, and I mean, Kyle and I both talk, so I don't fear that I'm putting too many words in his mouth, but there's like multiple layers of what are the outcomes? What are we accountable to achieve? What are the goals? Even if we kind of try to hold the concept of target or goal-driven work like at arm's length, like in the real world where people don't want to talk about complexity all day long, they still need to do a thing. We still need to coordinate with each other to achieve some kind of material change. Like, what are we doing if we're not doing that? So I think a lot of it is in that very meta way, getting to know and being embedded enough in that kind of mesh that connects all the things that you were just talking about, and then being able to just translate anything that a group is trying to cohesively achieve into the material output. So I've just spoken in so many abstractions, but the headline is,
I think
it's
that's
like so unique, right? It's so unique to every scenario. And sometimes I've joked about this on a couple previous chats, but sometimes it wouldn't look or feel like it's complexity or socially driven at all. It's going to be driven in the private sector a lot of times by increase that bottom line or make those shareholder meetings feel good, and so even while we might be trying to radically alter and or topple capitalist systems, we are still doing it from inside of them. So figuring out the places where you can like carve out that space, achieve the like short-term need that earns you the right to keep working, and then at the same time building the capacity to do the longer term stuff that we all know really needs to happen. So my hands probably aren't even visible, I know, in this slap, because it's like, do the short-term stuff that looks and feels very pedestrian to carve out the space for the bigger long-term horizon kind of work happening in parallel. Yeah, Kyle?
Yeah, you touched on two things, but I want to hear what you have to say, Kyle.
Yeah. So obviously, plus one to all of that all resonates. We dig into that one often. I think there's nothing I would really add, but the way that I would frame it, obviously we have to be very pragmatic, which is eventually what you were just saying, Jen. But I think the more we get an opportunity to understand how deeply rooted the incentives are for the way that we're persisting right now, how we don't know the water that we're swimming in most of the time. Once we understand these things, we're not up against any one person. Jen said on a few calls ago that the villain is distributed, and that is
Like that.
so front of mind for me all the time now.
Yeah.
It's not one thing we can pluck out. And so how do we swim with this current in a way that is beneficial for all of us and the current, essentially? The current where it needs to go, maybe, is the right way to think about that. Influence the current, maybe.
Also, we are the current.
We are the current. Of course we're the current. In so many ways that we don't even know. And so, and you know, we want to attack these things in an hour-long workshop sometimes, but then we go home and persist all of these things that are what we're attacking in that. So even in the biggest failures, I think, of going in and trying to go to a tech team and say, let's not think about if we can, let's think about if we ought, and how that falls apart, and like how you get chased out of the door and security comes and all that fun stuff. Like
get locked out of systems. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're now branded some sort of deviant within the product organization. Like all of that to me is there's still a component of I think of the movie 300, where you just need to show the Greeks that Xerxes can bleed, you know, like that sort of thing. Like as long as you can get that drop of blood, it is creating some ripple. We've left a mark that is going to have enough people wondering a little bit or asking a question, and that may go somewhere. That's a potential right there. So my approach to this is really thinking about the potential in its most basic form. How do we move towards that potential, but not have any expectation that we'll see it realized?
Yeah, and you both touched on the big existential question that keeps me up at night, and why I'm running at the moment right now is because I am bathing. I have always embraced the complexity of, especially the times that we're in, and also like my ethos of meeting people where they are, like just offering a really big welcome mat. And I'm curious to hear at some point, like what are the welcome mats to complexity, to that you've seen work for people, but and also an urgency to the moment because of what Jen had mentioned, like there's a lot of decision making happening a lot faster because shareholders and other economic incentives and et cetera, the situation in the US at the moment. And so I'm holding this complexity, but needing to meet people where they are and offering them an on-ramp into this through whatever political lens they see it through, whether it's, my kids' schools are not very good quality, or I'm worried about public safety and, or I'm worried about the economy, or the budgets are not balanced in this country. And so but people either like the conversations, it's hard. It's like a on-ramp, but I don't know how to continue engaging people in sort of the broader, and I don't say like systemic look at things, but just the broader, the different layers of it. And so for me, it's a constant tug of meeting people where they are, trying to take them on a mutual journey of uncovering how these things are related to these other things.
Yeah.
And yeah, constantly hitting lots of, and people are hustling to survive right now. So that's the other thing. Like, how do you urgency, complexity, surviving, day by day, and like, how do you bring everyday people into the complexity world?
Yeah, especially, thinking about the work that you do and have done. I would like to hear more kind of at this angle. I'll tell you. So but to kind of answer your question a little bit, because where this is making my brain go, a lot of conversation that I see, that I'm part of, that Kyle and I talk about, when people, I don't want to say get like initiated into, like a systems or a structural or a complexity oriented way of seeing things, there's that aha, and then it's, I need everybody else to see it this way or what have you. And you're not suggesting any of that, but there's this path that seems to happen where folks, the next step is kind of thinking like, how do we just make this, metaphorically, a space, a safe space. We can meet people where they are, roll out the welcome mat, make it a place where people on their own terms, like, a domesticated animal being released into the wild. Like, I don't want to push anybody out of any crates, but I want to open the door and let, on their own terms, people explore different things. And we talk a lot about that dynamic, but lately I've been thinking about it a lot more in terms of, instead of like on ramps, or I've even used the metaphor of like unkinking a hose that already exists. It's just kinked and we need to unkink it, which has been one of my favorites for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it more like things are hobbled, right? By either norms or habits or patterns, or what's visible and what isn't visible, and what's permitted and what isn't permitted, and what's perceived to be permitted, whether or not it is or isn't. And so like just literally the concept of a hobble, like a horse being hobbled so it doesn't run away, but all you have to do is remove the rope or the hobble, and suddenly there's more degrees of freedom. So I've been thinking a lot about like that welcome mat looks more like releasing or removing some of the hobbles, but not in this like enlightenment sense, like I'm the person who is magically able to remove the hobbles, but it's more like helping someone recognize those hobbles aren't really there. They're not really binding. So to like be very concrete, when I encounter these interactions with folks, kind of, in the sense that you're describing, where I want to help people feel more empowered by understanding things with this way, these ideas, a lot of times it looks like, someone will go, if only our leaders did this way, or if the system was different this way, we could achieve X. And usually there's somewhere where you can say, does that even need to be true for you to try X? What would you do in that case? Or, well, I can't because why? Well, I don't know. What if you tried it anyway? Like, what would be the worst thing that happens? Will you die? Will somebody get arrested? If not, like, what happens if we try? And so like the welcome mat might be, at least in my work, different for everyone. The welcome mat for a lot of my work with private sector clients is helping the individual people as part of teams inside companies go, wait, that hobble actually isn't really there, or it's there, but it's way looser than we thought. So as a horse with a hobble, we might still be able to do something. So I would, of course, though, be very curious, especially in your current work and your interactions with a lot of the constituents in the public that you're most interested in serving, that's probably different. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like there's probably some compare and contrast there.
Yeah. I don't know, Kyle, if you wanted, I can
I'll add a little yes and then I'm dying to hear your response there, but yes, and I kind of take the approach that I believe that everyone is already really intimate with complexity. Somebody gave them permission, all of us permission, to abandon that between 9 and 5 every day. We don't have our toddlers anymore. We don't have our hormonal teenagers anymore. We don't have cohabitation anymore. We don't have aging parents and decisions that have incomplete information or multitudes of outcomes in front of us. We can go into a place and we can have an org chart. We can have assigned accountability. We can have HR constrained conversations. We can have decorum around email protocol and meetings, and everything's on our calendar in neat blocks. So somewhere along the lines, we got convinced that we get to abandon complexity when we go into organizations. And I think everyone is struggling with the realization that that's not really true, and we haven't done a lot to prepare ourselves in the workplace for that. But then we go back home and we have to get the kids out the door to put them on the bus, or we have sick parents that we have to think about how we're going to take care of, something along those lines. And we do what we have always done in complex systems and in social systems. And, so I think we're, this might be another way of saying exactly what Jen just said. that's permission to be avoidant to complexity within certain contexts is that hobbling. And so once you kind of pat somebody on the back and say, you got this, I find that goes a really long way without having to sit down and say, here are some metaphors from biology or quantum mechanics, and here's the philosophy behind this, and all that. That's all great. And I know there are nerds out there like us that love that sort of stuff, but that's not approachable for everybody. And so that's where my welcome mat is. And I want to come back to your welcome mats in a little bit.
I love that. Yeah. No, I love that completely, because it's returning. It's acknowledging that we are in our existence itself is complex. And so we're already in it, and even encouraging someone to that in their day to day and juggling all the things that they're actually living through and experiencing, like that is sort of the agency that can like help someone continue. And so I think for me, like I have anybody who's worked with me has they said of like if they were to make a shirt with like my slogan, it would be like that Wilneida likes to follow the connective tissue. Because what I'm naturally into and what I've always done and find myself sort of leaning onto is just really asking a lot of follow-up questions and like helping people to storytell their lives, similar to what you said, about their experiences and what they're seeing. And I find that like guiding, for me, I know a lot of people may not like listening, but for me, like I actually love it. And I miss so many meetings, and yeah, my schedule gets really messed up because I get very lost quickly. But for me, it's strategically insightful, and it helps me to connect the dots of my own sort of real-time complexity analysis that may be going in a cerebral geek part of my brain. But I've also just found that people just love clearly and also have a lot to share and have moved to pieces of clarity and eurekas. And it just threw me just, I don't want to say like, like a therapist, but almost like, guiding someone towards greater agency and greater clarity, instead of like, you should do this and that and that. And like, and what you said, like taking a, like a instructional thing of like, okay, this is the complexity curriculum. And so I think we're saying the same thing is like the best way to unpack or the best welcome at is really just to recenter it back in the human experience and have people, whatever you can do to activate that humanity, that complexity, with like a pat in the back, with like lots of follow-up questions that show that you are seeing that person, you're acknowledging them, and you're listening, and they are like unpacking in real time through talking. Like I feel like that to me is like the most effective in a group setting. That is is a little bit trickier. Group settings tend to have, the ones that I've done lately, they have an agenda and an outcome, so you can't just have people talk without you being able to extract something at the end that is whatever is needed. Yeah. But I would love to create more spaces like what you guys are demonstrating it right now. It's like agenda, space, like whatever comes out, it's iterative. But I think in group settings it's gotten harder because there's a lot. I think we're so divided as a country that I think a lot of people censor. I think a lot of people some are really outspoken. There's like a lot of group dynamics that I think is hard to guide people through individual connecting with the complexity in their lives, and then like connecting to our complexity as a country or humanity right now in this moment. So I don't know, as a group, if you guys have had different Yeah, I'm sure that could be like a whole other.
Amen.
Do you do groups like this, by the way, with like no agenda and just
loosely bound?
loosely bound.
Yeah, like we always talk about there's a struggle between, people are going to commit time and resources and energy, and that means there's a transaction that needs to happen. So what am I going to get out of this? So stuff like warm data, which is a loosely bound format for sharing stories and allowing people and experiences and perspectives to entangle and just to notice where what that entangling might look like. How do you go into an organization and say the transaction is, you give me 2 hours to run this warm data lab and I will give you X? The answer is, I don't know. Well, I can say we'll humanize each other, but I that's a hard sell for like, okay, well, we're not running a daycare here. This is, an organization. We have to deliver, time is money. So there's a struggle there, but I think I loved hearing you talk about the sort of ahas, the relief, the sort of eureka moments that what I've found addicting about this work is that platform for catharsis that we get to create, where the slight adjacent move to look at something from another angle, usually provoked by the person standing next to you, is an unlocking of something that has caused a lot of strain for a period of time. And that's why when people walk out of these sessions and say this felt like therapy, that's exactly it. To me, that's the indicator that I don't care what else we did. That's a huge win right there. That reduction of strain, that eureka, is now an invitation to act a little bit differently, to approach something a little bit differently. And then we're off to the races. That's real systemic change there, starting at person number 1, reapproaching things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's, did you want to say anything, John, with your work with groups?
Just a knowing head nod. Kyle and I have, at this point, I feel like a lot of it's going to be a yes and. I think this is the reason, though, that a lot of folks, if there are spaces like this that do exist, they're often outside of the paid transactional world, right? They're on the side of desks, they're social or community organizational kind of thing.
Or guerrilla.
Yeah, everything's happening kind of, and then when they are happening as part of paid work, at least for me, I often joke that it's like they're in the Trojan horse that we sneak in. There's our second Greek reference on this call, but there's almost more like I like to think about it like it's in the sidecar, of this thing that's traveling along. And it's why if I'm engaged in any kind of client engagement, I pay attention to, if we're going to have weekly little status checks, that we don't overly formalize those, because the last 5 minutes of one of those meetings is where some of this happens. Or if we're in person together for working sessions or workshops or whatever it is, we're careful and thoughtful about having lunch and breaks built in for this purpose, or having the happy hour. Not to say that what you do in the structured container doesn't matter. It certainly does. The structure gives everybody permission to show up to this thing, and yet doing it in a way that doesn't turn it into like a performance or a theater. But, as I say, Kyle and I have talked bits about this, so I don't want to belabor it, for anybody listening. But what you're hitting on, Wilneida, is very much like at the core of this challenge, where it's almost like a bright light. You can't really look directly at it. So you kind of point your gaze over here and work with what you can see while this thing is in your peripheral vision. But the peripheral vision, that's where the real thing is. So, you're kind of you're handling both at once. And that's tough. It's hard work. I know it's fatiguing for people too, especially if they're used to seeing that more causal. We put in the effort, we do the community building, we act as the connective tissue. We like to see an aha, or we like to see 2 people that we introduced hit it off, or we like to see a group make a change. But sometimes we don't even get to see that, and whatever might happen is either so invisible or second, third, or fourth order, or nothing happens. So I have a lot of empathy for everyone in the world who self-identifies as a connective tissue person, because we out here and it's something.
It is. And also, were you going to say something?
I was going to, I was going to go pick on the welcome mats again. I want to hear more about yours, but
I was going to bring another
before
visual. I'll talk about the welcome mat, but I was going to say that I'm so appreciating listening to you guys talk, because you move up and down the ladder of abstraction, which is really hard to do. It's like going from the abstract to like, okay, this is what it looks like in this container or with this particular client. And I wanted to see, like, if you think that's do you think that's an innate human skill, or do you think, because I worked in, I'll just like, 5 years ago, I worked with cognitive brain scientists and learned through them about like intellectual flexibility and other kind of cognitive brain science things. And so I wonder, like how Einstein's brain, I think, is like they dissect it and it has like so many waves, I think. And it's like, he's able to just hold a lot of contrasting. And so I'm wondering, like, have you gone into the brain science aspects? What do you think about it? And also, do you think moving up and down the ladder of abstraction is like something you see the way we talked about, holding complexity, like we live it and it's in us, it just has to be activated and we have to be reminded? Or do you think it's like moves into something that's like, if you brought a brain scientist, they would have like something geeky to say about it or insightful?
Really interesting question. I don't know about you, Kyle, but I have not immersed enough in the brain science that I think would probably answer this in a way that I would feel comfortable saying. But my instinct, because to the bigger spirit of the question, is it innate? My instinct would be that it's not innate, that it's it's A, it's conditioned, B, it's modeled for you probably at certain points in your life, C, it's probably context dependent. But at the same time, there's no denying that there are some things that are actually a function of our brains and their development. And so this isn't to say that it wouldn't have some level of natural maybe potential there, right? Waiting to be like activated by certain early maybe or even early childhood experiences, right? Who knows? So this is me completely speculating. But I do think this is a really interesting question, because I get the sort of I get itchy when I see other folks who are really into systems or complexity fields, who really focus on the need to be able to not just zoom out, but also, move to higher levels of abstraction, and almost like imply that that's the goal, right? Like you got to be able to speak with this level of abstraction. And like you've just said, the more valuable or useful skill is sliding up and down that ladder. Now, doing it like within a single conversation, like Kyle and I do a lot, it's probably also just a part of like, we've established rapport, we have a lot of shared context now, we can use a lot of shorthand that someone who just shows up to this conversation for the first time and has never interacted with either of us might not be able to follow us up and down that ladder. Which, to that end, brings me to my other point, though, and I'm really glad you brought this up, because this might generate some really interesting things. There is something that at least I do, so I'm curious if you guys do it, but there is a self-reflection, a metacognition happening at all times for me. And I do remember learning at different points in my life that metacognition is certainly one of those dynamics, right? Cognitively speaking, that does differ across people. Again, whether it's state versus trait, whether it's mutable, that I don't know. But I do think that there's almost an active, constant metacognition that allows me to be able to go up and down that ladder of abstraction when I'm talking to Kyle and to most other people. But I also know that I might interact with someone, again, could be a client, could be a friend who just has no interest in some of the abstract things I'm talking about, where I am aware of that. And so I don't do it anymore. I'll then say, we're talking about very concrete things here. For me to pull in some dumb theory from some crazy philosopher that you don't want to hear about might be interesting to Jen, but it would be completely self-serving for Jen to bring it up. And so Jen is much more interested in engaging meaningfully, right, with the person I'm in front of. And so in that case, it's not like a strategic decision to stay at a different level of abstraction. It's the human relationship decision. And it's only made possible because I'm metacognitively aware of it. I'm curious if the two of you experience that kind of metacognitive awareness of doing that, or if it's not something you're conscious of, because that in and of itself, I think, is an interesting thing that a lot of other people we know that we talk to about these topics, they probably also experience that, but whether they bump up against folks who don't could be a real source of tension or friction. It's interesting.
And when
Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, would you define metacognition by like as an automatic thing or as a active internal life where you are in conversation with yourself on a regular, or a combination of both, or like more things?
This is a really, I mean, how much of a tangent we want to get on this, I don't know, but it's funny. I'll tell you a fast little tidbit. When I was, I want to say in like 8th grade, maybe younger, we had a science teacher who taught us about metacognition. It wasn't part of the curriculum, but she just mentioned at one point what metacognition was. And I think her definition for us, like 8th graders, was thinking about your thoughts. And and then she was like, who in this room, of middle schoolers ever thinks about your thoughts? For example, if you have a thought, like right now I'm thinking about this, apple that's on this kitchen table, but how did I go back and like trace your thoughts back as far as you can go? And she asked, who in this room ever does that? And I was like, oh my God, everyone does that. And I look around the room and it was like maybe half and half. Now, that isn't exactly a rigorous, like, clinical trial kind of study here. And it also might just be that her description.
It should be.
Didn't
I want to live in that world.
I that resonates, by the way, but yeah.
The 30 kids who didn't raise their hand might have just not understood what she was asking, or who didn't, they might not have. It doesn't mean that they didn't actually experience metacognition. It just meant that the way she described it didn't, make sense to them. But fast forward, so because of that, I had an awareness of the concept of metacognition from a very young age, which in and of itself, having an awareness of it and a name for it influences how I might be aware of it. Later on, I'm a high school physics teacher for a while later in my career, also still another past life of mine. And at some point, one of the professional development focuses for us one year was on improving metacognition, because at least in the way that it is studied in educational psychology and certain pedagogy kind of stuff, that metacognition does improve learning. We'll just leave all of this to be back another time. But they got real into the idea that we need to help kids improve metacognition. And how do you do that? Well, the particular strategy that we were all told to follow anytime students were assigned reading text of any kind, which in physics was not as prominent as, say, in like the English class, social studies class. The students were taught how to do something called talking to the text, which was, of course, someone somewhere's packaged up framework. And the idea was that as they read something, they were encouraged to like write in the margin of a book or on a little worksheet, literally like talking to it. So it was like they would hear the words they were reading in their head, and then they would like talk back to it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. They were encouraged to literally write down, this doesn't make any sense. We're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the time, da 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 da. And what strikes me today, with all the years of perspective I now have, the intention is good. But like, think about what that then generates. Kids are going to get graded on whether they complete the talking to the text part. So they just performatively write nonsense. They're not really necessarily actually engaging that process. And we also know that not all humans have that internal voice monologue. Not all people hear a literal voice in their mind. What if
By the way, everything that you just said could be like transposed into what people are saying about ChatGPT.
Yes, exactly.
Like, oh, it'll make us smarter, and it's like, no, we're talking to it, and like its actual cognitive abilities are actually declining. We're thinking less. But yeah, that's such a great.
It's just a really interesting question, and it's more generative than it is going to generate any kind of closure. But it's interesting.
Yeah,
I don't. What were we going to say?
No. I mean, I was more, trying to. It seemed like it could become what you were from all the years of insights. It could become an automatic thing the more that it's reinforced and you have the language and all of that.
Yeah.
But it is, no, like when you maybe at the early childhood development level, like it's less defined and developed, and for adults as well. Mm-hmm. But go on, Kyle. I was mostly absorbing what you just shared, because there were just a lot of nuggets of insights there.
Yeah. I wish I could say something about metacognition. I'm really not all that familiar, nor do I know the sort of neurobiology of how this works. But I've worked closely with the trauma-informed folks over the years, and what that's told me about, and I've dug into, I've closely related to the world of PTSD, and I've tried to understand that a bit more. And so trying to introduce complexity with that as a condition has been really fascinating, in that I find that there's a permission that almost comes with the ability to move through those layers of abstraction. There's a safety that's required to be able to back off of these things.
Internal safety, or like a reinforcing
internal
external
or systemic. Okay. Yeah, it's both. Like I think on the PTSD side, the we're going to hold uncertainty, to me, is very attractive. I think it should be attractive to everyone. We get to go explore, we get to learn things, we get to play, we get to generate. This is amazing. But I'm sitting next to somebody that's going to look at me and say, but how will we know what's going to happen next? And that shuts them down. They go into that fight, flight, fawn kind of mode. And the need to be very black and white about things, to see things in binaries, and to move towards certainty is a survival skill, or it's been reinforced by so many other conditions that's been happening. But at the same time, I've seen those same people hold irrationality and be comfortable with it in other contexts. And it's usually because there was some safety that allows for that, again, either internally or systemic. But it's also contextualized. I've been with organizations before where everyone's heard me say this a million times, I'm kind of an ambulance chaser when it comes to complexity work. I want I want people that have hit their head against the wall so many times that they finally realize, I don't have anything else to lose. Let's go try something. All of my tools don't fit. And so I need a tool that I haven't imagined yet. So screw it. Let's try something different. When I'm still working with people that are sort of under the gun to why haven't you delivered yet, and they feel like they haven't exhausted all of their resources, and I come in and say, let's take a risk, let's try something different, they're not ready to take a risk. They're not interested in difference. They don't know how to go explain this or own it themselves. All of that is a degree of comfort and safety and permission. And we had a whole conversation about scarcity and abundance a while ago. All of that fits into, can I move through those layers of abstraction? Can I slow down and reflect on these things from other angles? Do I want to? And also, what happens to my identity and my relationship to this if I slightly become adjacent to where I was 5 minutes ago? I was called to this for who I am. I'm permitted to be here. I'm included because of who I am. Do I have the freedom to walk out as someone slightly different than when I walked in? Those are all, I think, really fair considerations. And I think it's necessary for us that are doing this work, that are evangelizing this stuff, to acknowledge that, again, there's no ascension here, but there's also not a here's the acceptable truth that we need to get to, so much as how do we create the space that allows for that navigation, or at least, like I said, allows you to see that Xerxes can bleed. And you might walk out and say, yep, we didn't accomplish what I wanted to because I have these goals and I'm this person and all of that sort of stuff. But if that rattling is something to carry to the next context.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on a very interconnected piece of the conversation, which is the ability. It takes a lot of safety to be able to be okay with ambiguity, and and it kind of like loops back to how we began a conversation, which is like what a lot of things, when a lot of things feel uncertain, whether like you're going to find work again or any those things like that, like it is or the broader existential questions. Like it is for people take that, and some people thrive in that environment, and they really live, can come out of it strong, and other people, whether they have, harm to PTSD or other conditions that get in the way. Like there's other people that are just, find that absolutely frightening. And I work with a lot of people like that, actually. So in many walks, many walks of life, people that have a lot of anxiety when they don't know what's happening.
And again, it's not it's not necessarily a preferred space. It's a context relevant sort of thing. Like when we're sitting down and we're figuring out where we want to go for dinner, if I'm doing let's sit back and think about this for a little bit. Like sometimes it's okay to have a type A person jump in and go, I'm just going to make the call. This is simple. It's let's not ruminate on something as trivial as this. Like the ability to be directive. I always say I want to partner with somebody that has their feet firmly planted on the ground to give me the allowance to go float into space.
Yeah.
And between the two of us, we can accomplish something. If you just gave me the runway to do whatever, I might just float forever because that's a comfortable place for me. And but that doesn't get anything accomplished.
Yeah.
The person I partner with might just zoom through and do the same cookie cutter thing that they did on the last project that doesn't necessarily work here, but it'll get by. The two of us together can usually come up to I'm going to press you to take a little bit of a leap, but they're going to press me with some constraints that are going to keep me focused. And that's really a necessity.
Do you look for that in every, if we're getting close to time, sorry, but do you look for that partnership? And when it's not there, how do you like account for not having that?
Question for Kyle. Kyle, how do you provide yourself constraints when there's no one else to do it?
I don't. I beg people around me to provide constraints, or because I also find procrastination to be a superpower. And so, let's get into the procrastinating. Let's enjoy the procrastinating, and then I go into the shit, we're 24 hours out mode. Now that's the constraint. That has to be only way I can do it. Yeah.
To that end, because I'm experiencing that on certain things right now, not 24 hours, but I have a lot of different pieces going on in my work right now. And there's a level of, I know myself enough to know how much is too much, waiting, procrastinating, incubating is the preferred word. Thank you very much. Not procrastinating, but I also have the luxury in this case of either working independently or working with someone or other people who are on board with that. To your point, Kyle. And so the minute you now have either an ethical or social obligation or ties with the people you're around, those things obviously suddenly get so much more entangled. And I think that that's where this stuff really gets, it starts to be scary to people, because navigating all of that requires such a deeper level of trust, and the coordination needs to be a little bit more self-organizing, and kind of the notion, it's like mutual aid, but in terms of social organization rather than literal mutual aid. But you start to engage with other humans in a way that a lot of us in the States at least are not used to, because the systems we grow up and into look very different from that. So the minute you start talking about doing any kind of work that is what you've just said, Kyle, you're asking people to almost be, in relation to each other in ways that just haven't been patterned for them. And I will say very briefly, just because as you guys were chatting, I just kept thinking about how, I feel like the unspoken but probably agreed upon thing is that, we hear a lot about how important it is to get more comfortable with uncertainty or to become more comfortable with ambiguity. But also, sometimes we don't want that. We don't want to be comfortable with ambiguity. We actually just need to remove the ambiguity. There are still plenty of places where the better or more strategic use of our resources is to actually reduce the ambiguity. Now, a lot of things we do that with, we're doing it poorly and with misapplied tools where we're trying to force a situation to stay rigid in ways that aren't going to work, are going to eventually fail catastrophically. But there are actually other things out there, tools, methods, and in the right situations where we can reduce the ambiguity. I think it's just starting to develop a little bit of a better sense of which and when and where. And the metaphor that comes to mind is weather. because weather is inherently uncertain, the further out you go in terms of a time horizon. But weather is one of those complex / chaotic systems that we do actually forecast relatively effectively with modeling and with lots of models, and then looking at averages of models. And does it mean it's certain? No, but as something gets closer, and I'm thinking less about whether it's sunny or rainy, I'm thinking about things that have the potential for material impact, a hurricane, a flood that is going to, put life at risk and, damage. So I look at that, and every time I hear anybody out there in the world, not us, who is kind of like over reductionistically saying, we just all really need to build our ability to have less anxiety in uncertain and ambiguous times. We just need to learn to surf or sail or whatever metaphor. And then I think to myself, yes, but also I'm also glad that we are developing tools, like metaphorically similar to our ability to do some forecasting. And when a huge blizzard strikes, we lose a lot less in terms of life and property in 2026 than we did in 1978, because we're able to coordinate with each other in a more effective way in advance. And nobody in this February, when this huge blizzard came through, you in New York, Wilneida? So like this one that just came through, like kind of historic. You didn't hear anybody say, we don't know exactly how this is going to go. It really just depends on the track. And we're not really totally sure. It could be anywhere from 1 to 3 feet of snow. Y'all just need to get really comfortable with ambiguity.
I'm going to try an experiment. Next time my wife asks me to look at something in the pantry and see if we have it while she's putting together the grocery list, I'm going to say, just get comfortable with the ambiguity and see if she tells me to get off your ass and go find out. Yeah. It's that simple sometimes.
That's the thing. And I mean, granted, we do one well, a lot more than the other. So I think it's fine to, at least for now, over-index on not gripping so tight to certainty. I think we all benefit from learning to be able to navigate complexity without needing to grasp for control and certainty. That serves us all well. But I am starting to hear that chorus growing louder in a way that I'm like, okay, but some situations, that is not the right tack to take. You're better off trying to put your energy together and be able to understand what the likely contingencies are going to be. So becoming the kind of people who can effectively even have this conversation and ask, where are we on that spectrum, I think is going to be a really important, 21st century skill, so to speak. So, yeah.
That's what I was going to say. And I know we're at time. I read a lot of 21st century. Oh, we have till 3. Okay.
Yeah, if you're okay till 3, we have another. We can do 20 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. I thought it was like an hour, but I do see 3. But I've read a lot of 21st century leadership management, where it's and the future leader is going to have to embrace ambiguity, be able to lead through ambiguity. And so you're saying it's not an and or an or. It's like we have choices to deal with ambiguity, and there really is no everything's contextual, and there's really not one sort of leadership guidance.
Yeah, and it's I love to get into the, when you say this, what do you mean are we using the word the same way? 'Cause I think that idea of uncertainty and ambiguity for a lot of leadership is not the way that I would define it. I'm certain I've gone to presentations before, and the metaphors they're using for what uncertainty looks like. Yeah. Somebody, I remember at Capital One, a very senior leader and a very, very large audience doing a big presentation on how you lead through uncertainty and ambiguity. And they're talking about a GPS having to find new routes and being fluid to that. And I had to call them out and say, oh my God, a GPS is a data-rich environment. It's such a well-established multi-generational infrastructure of knowledge and constraints. There's nothing ambiguous about this. It is problem solving in a place that has permission to problem solve. We need to be talking more about the Pacific wayfinding as the true metaphor, but I don't think we all have that. We don't have that word together, right? It's one of those things I think is getting a little bit commodified, where it's just going to be like on a job application or a job posting, it's
The
going to have
way
that
the
bullet on there.
wayfinding.
Be willing. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you comfortable working with ambiguity? Sure, exactly. How comfortable and how are you defining ambiguity?
And
Well,
which certification do you have for
right.
being
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
comfort with ambiguity certification do you have?
Yeah, the cottage
Right.
industry
I think
building up
it's
against. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
that
I,
you
good.
know, were you gonna ask
I was going to veer a little bit back to something that we started with,
the
because
welcome mats?
this is the welcome mats. This is so, and I think we're still on that to an extent. How do we meet people where they are? I was telling Jen just before we got on the call. I said, Wilneida is really gentle about calling bullshit in a way that makes you self-reflect. Is that might not be how you describe it. I think that's how I describe it. And you brought up our old conversations on Facebook back in the day, because it was a place where we all stood on opposite sides of the road and threw bottles at each other. This is my position. That's your position. Let's just lock horns.
I don't want to. Was this during the times of the Wall Street meltdown as well? Okay,
yeah. And so, then the what were they called? The Tea Party sort of popped up all around.
That was the broader like scenario we were debating and throwing bottles at each other on Facebook. Yeah.
It was a great platform for it. Yeah, we just division was like so available to us. So I remember I was singing about Austrian economics and libertarianism in a way that, again, I stood on one side of the road and everyone else threw bottles and we went back and forth. And you would come in to the middle of those conversations and say, does your position hold up if you consider this? And you wouldn't explicitly say that, but that's generally what you were asking. And it really made me I get frustrated, like I'm running downhill and I have to stop really, really quickly. So, fuck, maybe not. But it's really like, it really sent me down a lot of paths to go look a little bit deeper, to pick a few things apart. And like my takeaway from that time, I still reflect on that a lot, was you had such a great way of approaching that. And it sounds like this is what you're doing today, is you're really steering into that. So I'd love to hear more about how that is just so seemingly natural to you, or how you've learned your way into making that such a proficiency.
Yeah. And it's funny, somebody a year ago like gave me the label of contrarian. Like I have to, because sometimes I have to get the most out of situations, I have to take different roles. And I, sometimes it's the translator, the connector, the contrarian, like, put something forth that might, elicit new ideas or reflections. But so yeah, that it's interesting that you brought it back to way back then, because I don't think I had the language.
You were experimenting on me, and that's fine. That was great.
I mean, it was, experimenting on you. And I mean, it was, lots of things to talk about. And I think it's like, even back then and even now, it goes back to what I mentioned. Like it's a mutual process of learning. Like, I don't want to say that it's selfish, that I'm doing that, but I'm also like always constantly trying to check myself as well, and wanting to, throw something out to see how people, it's like, I don't want to say mini social experiments, because I think it happens from a place of, not a place of like, trying to shape, things to serve my interest, but just more of like, this is like happening here. Like, what happens if I do this thing? And so it's good that you received it in that way. That it's, and by the way, like, I remember your thoughts being highly, thoughtful, and and very strong. But like, even then, like, there was some flexibility that I was like, huh, like this is like very, because I've debated libertarians, you know, in the past and the present, and it's like it's yeah, it's hard. It's sometimes really hard conversations, but it's, yeah. So there was like a space there where there was a lot of flexibility and kind of even or just moments of pause. And so I think if you were, and your question was like, how do I do it? How did I come to be that kind of person? Yeah, I think coming to be that person, like from the Facebook conversation, was that almost 20 years ago or 18? When was the Tea
What was that?
Party?
07, 08,
Yeah,
right around
but like
then.
Paul Ryan was like the House Speaker, even. But yeah, that was
Yeah,
like an era. My gosh.
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That was right after Obama took office.
that's right.
So yeah, that would have been 08, 09.
My gosh, almost 20 years. Yeah. So from that curiosity
Mm-hmm.
to now, like me a year ago, having someone observe that probably similar thing and say, like, like, I see that you like to take a contrarian role, and I think what makes me have peace with that is I think people feel like it doesn't come from a provocateur space, which it comes from a place of sort of deeper longing for deeper knowing, or just trying to move people from a space that just feels like it's stuck and not going anyplace. But yeah, you can't always. I wouldn't ask people to always trust intentions, though. Like, I think it's important to. Um, yeah, it's important to challenge, and I mean, I told people that to challenge the contrarian as well, because it's whose truths and whose yeah, which paths are you guiding people to, that I think that people might not, that's not where they need to go. And it's, so I mean, I can give an example of conversations and work meetings where it was trying to like identify strategic goals for the year, and there being a lot of questions about what audiences to prioritize. And that conversation took about, it was 3 weeks, probably close to a month. And so it was, yeah, in engaging and sort of coming in as a contrarian. And I'm going to go into the probably the metacognitive a little bit. Like, I did a lot of body language reading, even through Zoom, and I could feel things that were not being said. It's like a very weird kind of sixth sense that I wonder if you all have. But I could sort of sense why we were just not, because I could feel that certain people were not, through like their micro expressions and yeah, like flusteredness and behavior and other things. And so I just started being like, hey, I'm not really sure what this person is like, feeling uncomfortable. Like, I'm sensing, I see micro expressions. Like, I wish I could turn off this thing, this other eye that is being activated right now. But like, I'm going to assume that they are, because they're saying like they they think that this is the most important audience for this particular goal. And so I was like, I said that. And so I would say like, okay, why don't we just prioritize this only and just forget about everything else? And so those things like worked out, but it was because people then would be like, well, I don't want to do that. And I was like, oh, finally, like, we've talked about, we've done that. And so it's like, I would say like now the way it plays out is like, it's this tentacle comes out, where now it's like over, like, I'm seeing everything. I'm looking at every box. I'm looking at everything. And probably it gets kind of psychotic, I would say, um, at certain points. And I'm just like, I'm just going to say the thing that I think that person is trying to say. And just like, if I take ownership and I'm like, I'm going to be the bullseye, I'm going to be like, I may not feel that thing, but I'm going to say that thing that I think that person is saying, take a, point. I may not hit the arrow, but maybe I'll get close. And I have to say, like, it's been I haven't always been accurate, but I've been within like a 60% accuracy of what that, enough to be able to uh say the unspoken things. Yeah, sometimes take the hit for it, because sometimes I don't reveal that I'm doing that. So sometimes people are like, will talk to me after meetings like, well, Nita, like, I'm really surprised that you took that stance. Like, where did that come from? That's like nothing of what I know you to be. And it's like, and sometimes I have to hold that in, because I have to play the role for a little bit longer. And I can't be like, well, guess what? Like, I was actually like being contrarian in that thing. And so like, there is some reputational harm. So anyways, I'll just stop there. I don't know if any of that resonates with you guys.
Yes. I want to dig a little bit deeper on something, unless Jen, you had something you wanted to swing for first.
I'll just say this quickly and then go where you're going to go, because I love this. And I really I think we don't need to go into this in detail, but maybe it's a teaser, because Kyle and I, we've talked briefly, maybe you and I will pick this up in a future chat, but there's this notion of the tetralemma in logic and philosophy. And it's just this idea that, like, instead of just thinking about a polarity, these people are on opposite ends of some kind of political divide or ideological divide. And it's, instead of just being two, it's a logic thing, like in math logic, but it's really, that you could have, either yes and no, both and neither, it's kind of like just, but what I'm hearing in what your description is that in some ways you are masterfully acting as kind of the scaffold of having that tetralemma, because engaging with that is always helpful in group settings. It's not just a matter of like, let's find consensus, as we all know, but it is really, how can we safely explore some of the different sort of poles of our thinking without sacrificing our reputation or identity or what we care for. And so you are almost kind of like becoming the tetralemma itself, walking virtually around this room and saying, well, what if the answer is all A or all B, or both A and B, or neither A and B? And if there's not somebody in the room who is doing that from their own stance, sounds like you sense that and then can kind of become the embodiment of that. And I just think that's very cool. So now
it's very Trojan horse, because and it might not be the thing, but I found the Trojan horse way to be the most agency strengthening of people. Because I could come be like, okay, Wilneida, like, I've got this. Like, what I'm hearing is you're saying that, and sometimes I do that, like, and you're saying that, and like in the spectrum, like, that is this, not, and but I feel like I rub of people's agency, where I'm trying to do other nudges to that. But yeah, sorry, Lau.
You're doing Trojan mice. We're on Trojan mice now.
Ooh, what is that?
It's small influence,
Oh, I
small,
like that.
yeah, multiple small inching influences. Yeah.
Yes.
I think you hit it, Jen, because that's just a much more sophisticated way of my gently calling bullshit. Because you didn't come and say to me, you're wrong, or why don't you think harder about the person throwing bottles at you across the way? You were more saying, hold up this filter and then try to say that again, or take a step 2 inches to the left and then try to tell me, if you're still on the same page as you were 5 minutes ago. That's that tetralemma. That's much more elegant way of putting it.
Mm.
Where I wanted to dig deeper is, what is it that you need? Because what I was saying before about the amount of sort of safety we need to be able to step back, and certainly like the old, like the how do you as a white guy share your platform kind of question that I've always been asked is like, how do, like, I can read some of those things, and maybe I need to say things that people don't feel like they can say, not to represent them, but to open up that conversation, normalize the conversation a bit. You seem like you can act with curiosity. You're not under the gun. We have to get off this call in 30 minutes and we better have an answer. Like, you're not the one that is holding that or driving that, or it feels like you've got the permission to say, wait a moment, like, what is it that gives you that air cover to play that role within that group?
An air covering sense of like inner, like not to be revealed, or okay.
No, air cover, like protection.
Protection.
And is it internal?
Oh.
Is it systemic? Is it, what is it that's like, I kind of, there's times that I have to abandon like my, like, all right, like I've got nothing to lose here, so now I can say whatever I want. And there are other times that I'm like, and the strain is on. I need to like go with the flow at the moment. But I have to recognize when those things are available. This being your shtick, how do you make that so available to yourself, or acknowledge the availability?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, there's different triggers. I think that trigger that cover, and I think some of them are um, a sense, values around fairness. I think it's triggered in those senses where I feel like not all the perspectives are getting, being seen, and that triggers this like moral code inside of me that just like, what, like I'm just gonna go out there and just start completely being a contrarian in different ways. And yeah, so the moral code, I think also operating in settings where you do need to have the outcomes and the lessons, and then so just like pressure to produce and to get things out, and just feeling stalemate. And I think I have a very active inner world, and I grew up in a very I don't know if you remember my parents,
Sure do.
but like me and my sister, we grew up in a very kind of strict household, and had a very active inner world that just brought a lot of strength, that I think now as an adult, it's like it's like you can be in that conversation with you get a lot of strength from just sort of doing that internal sense making, and then putting it out in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
I almost I don't want to say the statement, but I've had people tell me, let me see how I can like say it ambiguous where it makes sense enough. But I've had people say things like, I can tell you had a bad childhood because like, and bad in a sense of, yeah, like you were put through things that, yeah, made you be more internal facing. And because you can do these, you get power or clarity from certain spaces that I think people that have had really, really good childhoods, like don't get, kind of miss out on getting everything. Is they're more external facing, they're more things have been provided and done for them, and so they have their expectations of where they draw validation or agency and power comes from a different place, so that I didn't have and didn't get, and so it came from some other place that I think you can convert into a superpower, which is I think is where a lot of that, if you want to get into like, yeah, the emotion, social emotional aspects of it.
Yeah, I think that's a whole
I don't know if that
other
resonates.
2-hour conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but what I hear so much is like that concept of like your locus of control, is very internal, and I think that's awesome and super key to hear the
100%.
ways that it manifests now, regardless of where you came to it by. Because again, this is probably just more of a harken back to past lives in education, but so much of educational nonsense was like, well, how do we help the children develop an internal, locus of control? And these things to me are more emergent than engineered. And obviously in your case, you might not actually wish to engineer an internal sense of control and agency via the means that you came by it. Nonetheless, it's one of the emergent things that you now have in your toolbox to help you achieve the things you want to achieve. So I am struck by that. We'll say it that way.
Yeah.
Just with an eye on the clock too, we've got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we leave time, like we always do, for if there's anything, I guess, Kyle, if there's anything else you want to ask, obviously, but also we like to give our guests, sort of the last word. If there's anything else you would like to say, to add on, or anything of any kind, we like to make sure there's time for you to do that. So
my last word is just that's so validating for the work Jenna and I have been doing and investing in community in this space, because there are so many lone wolves that are attracted to this for that sense of fairness or justice, or just being able to see the world as being so interconnected and not interested in first order returns and all these things, but didn't have a great language for it. I know I didn't for a very long time, not having any validation around it, and just to get together with a group of people that say, I'm thinking about this the same way. And this is a free place to talk about it openly and know that we're not going to get it right or anything. Like all of that, we started this thinking about support groups, just to say, where the rest of the organization is telling you you're doing terrible things to your career trajectory, this is a place where we get to say, there's so much potential here and this is so fascinating. Let's go. So thank you for that.
No, and that's actually probably where I would also ended this way, and probably our last conversation is like, yeah, I think you guys are hitting on something really, really true. I mean, it's in my 20 years of working and much longer living in the world, like it, yeah, I think that there's more people that have this orientation and don't have the community, and also have different curiosities and needs. I think, Lau, we had talked about, Kyle, of doing like case studies. There's a lot of people that want sort of the practical tools aspects of it, and the people that want, where we sort of ended the conversation, like the social, emotional, cognitive analysis of like how do you embody this in a true and honest way and share it with people, and use it as a superpower in different settings. And yeah, I'm curious, like which one, since you have talked to, I would love to have been in your shoulders when you're talking with all of these lone wolves that you're like us and you're bringing us together. Like what has been the resonating theme of what you're hearing from all of us lone wolves? Because you've had more conversations with that. Is there an urge or something that feels timely and feels like good for this community, that again we're not totally together all in the same room?
The biggest thing that jumps out for me, Jen, and then please fill in, but for me, it's that I'm finding it's particularly people that have not been consistently served by the system that they're operating in, that have had to find the other ways in, that have had to adapt in interesting ways, that have had to read the system in a way that gives them access or agency within it, and they're persistent about it. And the more they're exploring and pushing through, the more the sort of veneer is dropping off, and they're getting a real interest in, I can engage in this in a more meaningful way. It shouldn't just be a survival technique. There is a truth in here somewhere. And once they're starting to trip over, like other people have been doing this work, people are thinking about it in this way, there are studies being done, there's a philosophy behind this, there are methodologies, like I can be a part of this. It is so incredibly empowering for people to latch on to that. And so it's been amazing to watch as I'm connecting to people. And it's not necessarily like you need this particular language of Cynefin or complex adaptive systems or computational complexity or anything else. People that are just interested in participatory work or indigenous communities or any of these sort of, they're coming in and they're using very different words, but they're directionally also aligned, and also bringing in something really special in that alignment that just kind of reinvests in the whole. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's an
I love
interesting
that.
question. I think there's the only other word I would add to that mix is there's a curiosity that I think is fueling a lot of this. I think there are probably people out there for whom they might be starting to notice or engage in certain things, but maybe it's the folks who, and I say folks who have curiosity, not again as like it's an innate gift, you either have or you don't, but through whatever, entangled circumstances have allowed a person to cultivate and learn to act on their curiosity muscle. People are starting to follow their curiosity. And I don't think that's leading everybody to like one final destination, but I think what it is doing is leading people to kind of generating these little whirlpools, so it's cool to see. It's cool to be part of it, and it's cool to be maybe observer to it or facilitator to it too. So yeah. Anyway,
very much participant.
Yeah. I mean, not only that, am I passively being swept along? Am I actively sticking my finger out there to change the current? Like all of the above, right? Literally all of the above. So that's the tetralemma. It's both, yet neither, all four, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I guess we'll say thank you.
No, thank you.
This has been wonderful.
This is a good chat.
Yeah.
So
likewise. Thank you so much.